Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. If you would, silence your phones if you haven't done so already. And at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order with the opening prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Need a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
So moved.
Got a motion. Do we have a second? Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Chair votes aye. All right, this time I'd like to introduce you to Mr. John Pasota, the new Director of Administration.
Hey, John.
Come on up front, sir. So everybody can see you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I look forward, enthusiastically look forward to working with each and every one of you and the citizens of this great county. And I got started last week, and that old saying about taking a drink out of a fire hose, that's what's going on right now. So please be patient, but I'm a phone call away. I'm right next door. I'm here, open, and available, and looking forward to working again with each and every one of you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Pasota.
you.
Thank you. Glad to have you, John.
Ms. Hartley.
Okay, good evening, Mr. President, council members, ladies and gentlemen. We have one change to tonight's agenda, and that is the work session to discuss the proposed legislation regarding the employment status of certain county employees. And that work session will be postponed to the July 21st council meeting.
Okay.
The first item on the agenda this evening is Resolution Number 47, 2020, authorizing the county executive to accept a grant award in the amount of $18,120,304 from the United States of America, acting through the Federal Aviation Administration, under the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, also known as the CARES Act, and this is through the Airport Grant Program. And I'd just like to point out that this is a reimbursable grant, meaning that the airport must spend the money first, and then it would receive the grant funding for the approved expenditures. And we do have Mr. Tony Rudy here, who is the acting airport manager, if there are any questions.
All right, Ms. Hartley, did you skip something?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry.
It's all right, we'll
we have-
finish this real quick then, since we're already on it. Okay, need a motion to approve resolution number 47-2020.
So moved.
Got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of resolution number 47-2020, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. All right, Ms. Hartley.
Okay. So next, we're going to have discussion with Mr. Chris Bitters, who is the general manager of the Delmarva Shorebirds.
Thank you, Mr. Bitters. I know it was kind of short notice, but with the seasons changing and everything going on and your future plans for the rest of the season, how you're going to use the field, maybe make a quick summary.
I appreciate you, everybody having me, President Dodd and council members. As I was telling earlier, it's hard. I usually have a hard time making eye contact with everybody when you're in front of me, but now got people behind me, so I'll do my best to nod my head. But yeah, so I think everybody's heard the obviously unfortunate news that the 2020 minor league baseball season across the country has been canceled. We can blame it on COVID, is really the blame on it, but basically, Major League Baseball is unable to provide us the players, which that's what they do, is our Major League affiliates provide the players. Clearly, at this time, if you're a baseball fan, you're following along, they're having their own challenges just getting the Major League season off and running. Major League Baseball's projected opening day is July 23rd. I think the Orioles opening day maybe the following day, July 24th. But they're trying to test several thousand people, and I think they've had some opening weekend holiday hiccups with that. So minor league baseball, to put it in perspective, well, I know most people here only think about the Shorebirds and us, which is great. Minor league baseball is a multi-level entity of 8 leagues, or 8 levels, 16 leagues, 160 cities, and 43 states. So in an effort to try to send players to 43 states, 160 communities, testing, all the things that they're trying to pull off the major level, I'm assuming is the directive on why they were unable to provide us players. Also, under the current orders per the governor, even if they did send us players, we can't have fans. So, so even if they were able to send us players, implement testing, all those protocols, per the governor's orders currently, we are not allowed to have spectators at live sporting events at this time. So, so with that, as an organization, we'll go 18 months with no baseball. September last year. And we all hope that by next April, we're back in a normal world and go from there. So kind of walk back a few months. What have we been up to? Obviously, over the last 2-3 months, our staff is, like everybody, trying to figure it out, planning for all scenarios. The scenarios at the beginning were, hey, we're going to be shut down for a few weeks to maybe a few months to maybe we can operate under socially distant guidelines and laying out capacities of stadiums with 6 feet gaps between sections of seats. How do you manage the fans? Collaborating a lot with our industry, but obviously that didn't happen. So those plans. So, basically planning for all scenarios, and the worst result came was that the announcement that we would not be having a minor league season. So, over the last 2 months, or I should say the 2 months when really everything shut down, and we're in the midst of the shutdown. The stadium worked with PRMC. We hosted a COVID testing site. Many of you may have saw that as you drove by. There's a tent in our parking lot. Our staff during that time, except for a couple of us, remote worked as best they could. We're not really built for remote work when we're really built for being at the ballpark and with our folks, but we remote worked during that period of time. And then in May, we also worked with Wicomico County Health Department, Lori and her team, to conduct the mass testing that was held here at the stadium as well. I think they tested 22, 23, 24, 2,500 people over that 2-3 day event, but one day was a rain out, so really 2-day event, I guess. So that was successful and good. Up until that point, we weren't really able to host anything or do much, so we lived in a virtual world like everybody else. We've hosted virtual 5Ks, virtual happy hours, virtual everything you could think of, and I think pretty much everybody got tired of the virtual world once we went into a phase when you could get out of the house. So obviously with the news last week, I guess it was, that our season has been shelved, was the technical word. We've communicated with all, I guess, at some level of communicated with all stakeholders, meaning our fans and people that have accounts with the team. An email went out to a certain group Monday. Letters went out to our season ticket holders on Monday as well, hard mail letters, so they should be getting those tomorrow or by the end of the week. We'll start follow-up calls later in the week with those folks. Obviously, our hope is that our account holders, which majority of them have been great. I shouldn't even say the majority. Everybody I've talked to has been great. And a lot of people want to continue to support the team. Obviously, if there's a account holder that needs a refund, 410-219-3112. Call us, let us know that, hey, you need a refund. We've had refunds already. I cut checks every Thursday. So obviously there's people that have a lot of concerns, whether it's COVID-related concerns, financial concerns, health-related concerns. Doesn't matter to us what your concern is. That's what you choose. For those people that are willing to stick with us, that have made payments, without getting into the exact details of it, because there's so many different types of accounts we have, we've offered them opportunities to roll their accounts over to 2021. And I'll call it an interest incentive based on the fact that whatever they've paid is getting some interest on their money, since it's obviously sitting with us. So as well as we've given our season ticket holders an option to take that interest and donate it to community groups. So there's 2 options. We've had fans that have offered just to keep our money and bill them for next year because they know how difficult this will be, particularly as we hit, I guess it was mid-March when we were full steam ahead getting the stadium ready. So, a lot of money gets spent between January and mid-March to order everything in the world. And then, April on is when we really make our money. So, anyway, so it's going to be tough. We'll be fine. I don't want any pity, as I told the newspaper the other day when they interviewed me. I'm not going to talk about the financial side of things. It's just what it is. We have good ownership. We have good management. We'll get through it. We've kept the majority of our staff employed, our full-time staff. And our goal is to continue to do that as long as we can. And, get through the backside of this together. We had a great staff this year, and along with our fans, and get through the backside of this together if we can, and come out hopefully stronger next April. Obviously, concerns, big time concerns is what does our world in the live sports events or mass gatherings look like come April 2021. Obviously, that's a long ways away, but I read the news like you guys do, and who knows what that's going to look like, and it's going to be hard to predict the future. So, but I'm proud of the work our staff's done during a very challenging time, especially with remote work, using personal computers, personal cell phones, trying to reach out to fans. And, a lot of our communication has been via email and social media. But, so moving forward, what are we doing? We're working with Lori and David and Steve and whoever else I need to work with on what types of approvals we have. I've read more governor orders than I probably ever care to after this year is over. And I've read more CDC guidelines and state health department guidelines and everything else since this has all gone on. We are able to now start hosting youth sporting events on a limited basis. Obviously, there's a spectator regulation, I guess you would say. So we've held a few of those with travel ball teams, those other folks that would like to use the field. We're working on a drive-in fireworks show. I'm hopefully having news by the end of the week on a drive-in style fireworks show that we'll be able to shoot and charge a drive-in price per car type price. It'll all be done with touchless apps where you can buy your parking pass on an app, come on in, we scan it, and you go on your merry way. So we got approval for that. We've received approval, tentative approval I'll call it, for movie nights on the field where we can socially distant put squares on the field, painted, and families can have a pod, I'll call it, of sorts, and 10-foot aisles and all these kinds of things. So, we're evaluating that. I mean, at this point, we got to be prudent with what we do, both on the health side of things, because obviously we're stewards in the community, as well as, there's a certain amount of risk in anything you do. And you could probably talk to anybody out there that's running the business. Everything you're doing now is costing you a lot more because you need more staff actually with less people, and you need, wipes and disinfectant and all that. So we're planning some of that. We have a staff meeting tomorrow to hopefully narrow in. I mean, youth sports has been, I've gotten a lot of calls on that thus far, so that's been good, and that'll probably occupy most of the weekends between now and end of October. And then we've had some calls from community groups that may want to look to host outdoor events that, might be easier to host outdoor than indoor. So we're still working through those. So not all of it's firmed up yet, but we're positive that we can create some good community activity. Make it to the backside, and hopefully next April we're playing ball in a packed stadium, if that's allowed. So I'm glad to answer any questions you might have at this time.
Well, it's good news that the stadium's not staying idle, so that's great to hear that there's something going on just about every weekend now.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a book, but the way the interest has been, and certain folks that like to use the field for travel tournaments, it seems like if that's the way we want to go, it can go that way pretty quick. So,
do we have any questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Holloway.
You were talking about youth events. I know there's quite a few like softball leagues and around the county. Has anybody reached out to them to give them the experience of maybe playing in a stadium like that, something they haven't experienced before? Would it be something you think they would be interested in, or?
I would be very open to it if they're open to it. Again, I haven't personally reached out, or they haven't reached out to us that I'm aware of. We've only fully been back in the office for about a week and a half, 2 weeks now, once the governor allowed non-essential places to open back up. We're open to those types of things. I mean, obviously there's some fees involved in that, just covering our costs. But we're definitely open to it. I got an email on LinkedIn, I guess you'd call it. There's some kind of archery group in town that the field might be a cool place to do it at. So I have no idea about it, but hey, if you can use open space and, we can make it work and, live by the guidelines. That's the hardest thing, because some of the user groups, there's guidelines and people, the hardest part for my staff and everybody is that you can't just always do what you've always done.
Right.
Like, you have to think about lots of other angles. But we're very open to any uses for the stadium. I mean, we obviously have a very expensive field that was put in several years ago that we maintain. So as long as it's not messing up the field, we're open to all ideas. That's why we're exploring movie nights and, anything we're doing or running by Lori in particular, and whoever else she assigns to have us run by the health department to make sure we're on the up and up in her world. So.
Good question. Any more questions?
I got a quick, go ahead, Nicole.
Bill.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you were still doing the youth baseball camps.
We're not doing baseball camps of now. We can do them. We haven't physically organized any yet.
Yeah.
And normally during our season it's easy because I got 30 guys. I go in the locker
Yeah.
room and pay a bunch of guys to run a baseball camp. Now I don't have guys. There are some local minor league players and some local coaches that I'd like to reach out to see if there's a way to put something together, even on a very truncated basis, I guess
I
you
know
would
they're
say.
very
So,
popular.
yeah, no, we love doing them. We do a couple a year, and my challenge is that I don't have 30 guys in a locker room anymore that I can grab and say, hey, we're doing a camp these 3 days. Who wants to sign up for it? But it's something I definitely would love to pull off, and other teams, whether they have an ex-athlete or somebody that's in town, is able to pull them off, has been doing it. So.
Mr. McKay?
Chris, before the whole COVID situation even started, Major League Baseball had already made changes to minor league in terms of the elimination of several layers and teams. And we weren't, fortunately, we're not affected by that. But do you anticipate or heard any kind of rumblings that may change or and even further possibly due to this now, just because so many other things have changed? Or is that just, at this point, the focus is on trying to savor a major league season in some capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Mr. McCain is talking about, for those that have followed, is Major League Baseball. So our working agreement with Major League Baseball is governed by what's called a PBA, Professional Baseball Agreement. It's what defines our relationship, minor leagues with major leagues. And Major League Baseball, I guess it was in the off season or some point last year, proposed to cut minor leagues from 160 teams down to 120, basically eliminating a level and then reorganizing teams from that level that were getting cut, potentially to stay and other teams go. So it was roughly 42 currently affiliated minor league teams going bye-bye. I've never been given the list. I've only read what everybody else has read, to be quite honest. The Shorebirds were on the list, and we're good to go as far as I know. With regards to the negotiations, so nothing has been finalized with that. There was a lot of negotiation going on up until COVID hit, and I think you probably all saw some very high politicians, fighting for teams in their communities that were on that cut list, from presidential candidates to senators to everybody, fighting to save their team because they believe minor league baseball is a valuable community asset. So I think for the last several months, everything I've heard is that the focus has been Major League Baseball is focused on getting their season up and running, and there hasn't been a whole lot of conversation where that's heading. That will head somewhere. I don't think it's just going to go. The thought of contraction of minor league teams is not going away. It's just on pause right now because they're so focused on trying to get the major league season. My guess is if they can get up and running cleanly, that conversation will happen very quickly. I think the challenge is that some of those teams that had politicians fighting for them very hard, COVID is down. They've lost some of that momentum they may have had at one point in time. So,
Thanks.
but I think we're still good here in Salisbury, Maryland.
Any more questions?
Has there been any analyst, what kind of financial burden you're going to take from all this?
I won't be able to disclose that publicly, but it'll be big. I mean, it's going to be significant, like really big. I mean, we have 16 full-time staff members. We're trying to keep them employed. That
was going to be my next question. Are you going to experience any layoffs? I know you said you've been trying to keep them busy, but I mean, are you going to experience any layoffs?
When it first hit, we laid off a couple people. We've done a couple furloughs since then. We're hoping to bring those people back as soon as we have some direction on a 2021 season at this point. Because normally by now, without what the topic Mr. McCain was talking about, normally by now I already have the 2021 season scheduled. So normally this time of the year for me and half my staff, we're kind of 1 foot in current year, 1 foot in next year, a lot like you guys with budget season and stuff like that. So for us, we've tried to take a long-term approach with our staff. We have a good staff. We want to keep them together. And so we have done some staff reductions as needed, and obviously some reduction in hours as well. But our goal has been to keep staff. And the reality is the more of these events we can have, the more hours I can give staff to work, and the more we can keep busy with to keep it going. So that's part of my motivation, not only being a community asset, but finding ways to keep that staff even more active than they are today. So obviously with the official cancellation of the season, we're plenty busy, but it seems like I've been busier during this COVID thing than I'd rather play games. So less work with games than it is with COVID. But no, the losses will be real. It's a real number. But again, thankfully, we have strong ownership and management that will come out the other side. I mean, if you listen to the minor league baseball president, Pat O'Connor, the other day, I mean, he indicated that up to 50% of teams may not come out well on the other side without aid or maybe selling. So, but we'll be fine.
Any more questions? Thank you, Chris.
Nope. Thank you. And again, if you guys have any questions later or requests, just give me a call at the stadium.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Thank you. Am I supposed to wipe after I leave, or?
You can,
All
yes.
right. Let me do that for whoever's next.
Ms. Hurley.
Thanks, Chris.
So next on the agenda is Resolution Number 48-2020. This is authorizing the county executive to accept a grant award in the total amount of $2,000 from the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore to provide emergency housing in response to COVID-19. And we have the Director of the Local Management Board, Michelle Bradley,
Thank you,
here if
Chris.
there are any questions.
I need a motion to approve resolution number 48-2020.
So moved.
Got a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Passes unanimously. Ms. Hurley.
The next item is Resolution Number 49-2020, authorizing the county executive to accept a grant award in the total amount of $58,008 from the United States Department of Justice under its Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Program. And again, we have the Director of the Local Management Board here to answer any questions.
I need a motion to approve resolution number 49-2020.
So moved.
Got a motion, need a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, resolution number 49-2020, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Ms. Hurley?
Next is Resolution Number 50-2020, authorizing the county executive to accept a grant award in the total amount of $25,000 from the Maryland State Department of Education through the 2021 Preschool Development Grant Birth Through 5 program. And if there's any questions, the Director of the Local Management Board is here.
All right, need a motion to approve resolution number 50-2020.
So moved.
Got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second, any discussion?
I have some questions.
Ms. Ackley?
Do you want to come out?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So what is the 25,000, what is that allocated for?
Well, in the budget, we are implementing the strategic plan from the $25,000 that was approved last year to develop that for the next 5 years. So now that we have that strategic plan, this $25,000 is going into that. So some of it will be for advertising the program, training for workforce investment for early childhood educators, stipends for substitutes from early childhood programs to attend meetings when we go back to in-person meetings, because if they have to hire a substitute to come to our meeting, a lot of times they're missing it, so we don't get the input from those early childhood care providers. So that's a big portion of it. And website development is another portion of it.
And this is an MSDE grant.
Yes.
So why is the local government applying for it? Why is the Board of Education not?
Well, the Board of Education isn't the chair, so it's not specifically for the Board of Ed. It's a mixed delivery system, so it's supposed to be a collaborative. And the Board of Ed did have it in its inception back in 2012, when it first came about. That was their first funding, and it went unfunded from 2015 until last year. Then when the funding source came available, they asked the LMB if we would monitor and oversee and apply the grant for the collaborative. And we said yes, because we've been a member of the council for a while, and it just seemed like a good position for us to sit in and be a neutral convener between public schools and the partners, just for that equity piece.
So it's a diverse board? Because I don't remember, trying to look at the appointments. The composition of the board, is it a pretty diverse?
It's pretty diverse. I mean, could we do better? Probably, sure.
So the county executive appoints someone from his office, correct?
I'm sorry. So
The county executive appoints someone from his office?
from his office? Yes, that's one of the positions. one of the suggested mandated positions that,
That's one of the voting.
yes,
Who is that?
it was Weston.
Okay.
Any more questions? Ms. Hackley, are you done?
Yeah. Do you have anyone from the Spanish-speaking, Haitian-speaking community?
Yes, we actually have Rosa Rodriguez from Telamon. She just recently started attending in that capacity when we went out to recruit her, because part of the strategies that we had put in place was to translate some of these early childhood developmental things, ages and stages, into multiple languages, so that when we took them to the library at our resource centers, they will be available. And we also have Natalie St. Fair. I'm hoping I'm saying your name right. I'm sorry, Natalie. She is our Haitian interpreter, and she also works at King's Kids Academy, and they're one of our partners. So she's been doing that for us. So they have 2 representatives, because she acts in the capacity of translating. And community outreach, because she's very engaged with her community.
Any more discussion?
So if someone wanted to apply to be on this committee, is there an application on the website?
No. I don't think there's ever been an application. When I went back and looked at what little historical documents we had, they were letters of invite from Rick Pollitt, who was the executive director at the time.
Any more discussion? All in favor of resolution number 20-20, I'm sorry, all in favor of legislation bill number 20?
50.
You got me distracted there.
50
All in
days.
favor of resolution number 50-2020, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Chair votes aye with 1 nay, Ms. Hurley.
That's all I have at this time.
Okay, Mr. Taylor? Thank you. Can you wipe that, Michelle? Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I'm going to pull my mask down too, just a little bit. We have one legislative bill for introduction tonight, legislative bill number 2020-05. It is an act to amend Chapter 29 of the Wicomico County Code, Article 2, titled Grant Funds, Sections
Thank you, Michelle.
29-18 through 29-21, and to add sections 29-22, 29-23, and 29-24 to provide greater transparency and full accountability of the county's allocation of grant funds. This is, of course, first reading. It was introduced, well, not introduced, but it was discussed at a work session. There is, in the briefing book, I believe, a copy that has the actual changes. This is a fairly extensive bill, and the actual changed or new language is highlighted in yellow. I don't know if there's going to be any discussion of it tonight. I have two. One of these things, when you sleep on it sometimes, you kind of have some further thoughts about it. I have two general additions that I'd like to suggest.
Okay, let me
Don't
introduce.
Don't let me forget them if we get
All right,
into
let
the
me go ahead and
discussion.
introduce legislative bill number 20-05. Do I need a motion?
So
Need a motion to introduce. Got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion now?
Just, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
The, Mr. Taylor, I know you mentioned the work session, but it was nowhere, and I can't remember the work session frankly, but I know we didn't have anything in this detail. You know, this is very extensive, as you said. You know, I think if I remember right, our work session was pretty,
Yeah, we did have a work session on this, I believe, at the last council meeting.
but it was pretty, pretty brief. I mean, we didn't,
That is correct. It
Right.
wasn't put in legislative bill form at that work session. You just had the text.
right.
Yeah, I believe that what we have highlighted in yellow was discussed at the work session, wasn't it?
Yes.
Presented. There's been some very, very minor typo-type changes to it, and that's not what I referred to when I said I had a couple other suggestions. I can go through those typo changes if you want me to. I really don't think they change anything substantively.
Mr. McCain, do you want him to go through it?
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
All right, any discussion? Any discussion? Mr. Davis?
Article 2, the last paragraph in 2918, says from a grant other than an anticipated grant that council has approved by amendment of the county's budget to identify the general nature and source of the grant and the department that will administer the grant, specify the revenue from the grant, and itemize the expenditure therefore by amounts and purposes of the grant, subject to such conditions and restrictions that council may impose upon expenditures. How can the county, if a grant is being proposed and a grant already got specific guidelines, how can the county council go in and put in additional restrictions?
Well, I think it has the power to do that now, whether, if you put something in as a condition that would be directly contrary to a condition in the grant, then obviously there would be a problem. But I don't think we want to, at least I would suggest not, omitting the power to put in conditions and restrictions. One thing that was mentioned at the work session, I think by Ms. Ackley, was the ability to get updates on how the grant money was being used. And that would be an example of a potential condition that could be put in on the approval that wouldn't, at least in my experience, and I don't think it would be very unusual, that would negate anything in the grant conditions to ask that there be
grants-
some sort of a periodic update to council.
Well, most grants already got that in to the grant, that they must have to report the expenditures and updates to where the grant comes from.
Well, some do, some don't. I mean,
I think most of
yeah.
them do. 'Cause you have to report that money as you're spending it, and you have to be accountable for it.
Well, the county does, but there's no requirement to report anything to the council normally. For example, on the airport grants that we're going to be looking at, there's nothing in there that requires any kind of an update to the
Well, I think we can just
council.
do that out and out, because now I think we're starting to try to micromanage grants and stuff, and I don't think that's part of our job. That's really the executive job. If we start micromanaging every grant, we'll be here all night.
Well, I mean, as I say, I mean, just to respond to your concern, you don't have to do anything. I mean, there's nothing in there that says they have to do it. It simply gives the council the ability to do that. They do not have to do it in any particular instance.
So if we wanted to ask how a grant was impacting the community, if it was they're providing outreach, any specifics on that grant, we could ask those questions.
Yeah, that would be a condition that you could
Yeah.
put in, that the
We do that
executive
anyway.
branch
I
has
mean,
to.
we just did it a while ago.
I mean, we can always ask the questions, but kind of getting Mr. Davis's concern, I mean, actually, I had made a note on here as well about, striking this whole part where we talk about restrictions that the council may impose upon the expenditure. I mean, it's fine asking questions, and it's fine addressing Ms. Ackley's concern about them giving us, information and updates, but us putting restrictions upon a grant, I mean, that could be very problematic. I mean, many grants are very specific in terms of how they're supposed to be used. But before we go too far with that, do we need to, discussion-wise, do we actually need to introduce this to continue discussion, or do we need to?
Discussion's first, and
Okay.
then we vote on it.
All right. I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that. Yeah, because I got lots of questions. I mean, I know we could be here for a long time going through, because this is at the end of the day, it's a total rewrite of the current procedure that we have. So, I mean, I think this would be a quite extensive work session to work through this. Like I say, it's a total rewrite.
Well, I mean, it's up to you all how you want to proceed. I mean, it's been introduced for first reading.
Any more discussion?
Well, I guess
Joe?
it doesn't matter really one way or the other. And what I'm looking at is, I don't think this is gonna be something that every grant that we're gonna demand this kind of action. I think it would be a situation if a council person has questions or concerns when the grant is approved, that they can follow up on it at a later date. And it gives us the opportunity, or gives the council opportunity if they want to follow up on it. I'm sure different council people will have different interest in how grants are handled. But I don't see this happening with every grant we approve, so I don't really have a problem with leaving that in there. I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference as far as what gets done, but it does give the council the ability to say, I want to follow up on this at a later date. Is that basically what it's doing?
That's the intention. As I say, the way it reads is council may impose. It doesn't say shall.
Or will?
It says may.
Or will.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're talking about two totally different things.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe's talking about, following up. I don't think any of
We've
us
been
have
doing
a
that
problem
all
with
along.
that. This is talking about putting
Restrictions.
restrictions on the grant at the time of the approval, as the council can oppose upon the expenditure.
No,
That's different.
there may be instances where you want to do that. I mean, who knows? I mean, we're talking about the general universe of grants. We're not talking about any specific grant. And that's why it's in there, is to give you the power to do that.
So, Mr. Taylor, like the grant that we accepted from MSDE, we could ask, with the members who are on the advisory committee, is that in line with the grant? Would that be putting restrictions on it and saying you,
I'm not
guess that would be
familiar with,
obvious
I'm not
to say.
familiar with that particular grant or exactly what you're driving at, but it would seem to me that if you want information about how a grant is going to be used, you can put that on as a condition, both in terms of getting information and then also finding out whether those particular expenditure objectives were realized and met. And that's the purpose of it, is to give you all an open
More transparency.
opportunity to do what you might want to do. As I said earlier, obviously, if you put a restriction on that would be absolutely contradictory to the grant terms, well, then obviously there would be
Yeah.
a problem. But I don't think because of that possibility that you might do that, you don't want to restrict your power, at least in my view.
yeah.
But right now, the way this is written, what you exactly said is what can exactly be done. We could put restrictions on a grant contradictory to the specifications in the grant. That's the way it's written. So we either got to add something to this saying we can't make restrictions that would be contradictory to the specifications in the grant, or we got to strike it, one or the other.
Well, I mean, look
You
at
can't
it
leave
the
it
other
like it
way.
is.
Look at it the other way. If you wanted to put a restriction on it that was contradictory, you could just simply deny the grant. I mean, so how would it really be any worse than
Well, that's-
that? You can just turn the grant down.
Well, that's not a good answer to the question. I mean, what you're saying is you're promoting leaving in there the ability for us to contradict specifications that are in grants. That,
So,
why would we want to contradict?
so should we add a sentence, something to the effect of, as long as it does not contradict the grant?
I
I
would-
look at this as
Right, I would
another,
agree.
there
Yes.
might be somebody have a problem with approving a grant, but if we have this in here, that we can use this as a tool to, somebody can say, well, as long as we can do this, I'll vote for it. So what do you suggest, Bill? Was putting something in there as long as it does not contradict with the provisions of the grant?
Oh, I think at the very minimum, yes, we should have a statement in there saying, we cannot impose restrictions that, contradictory or
Okay.
to the
Yeah,
specifications of
that's
the
fair.
grant.
Can you do that, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, just how about if we added at the end of that sentence then, that do not conflict with the terms and conditions of the grant?
Because I don't think we had any problems in any grants that we had passed. And if we asked anyone that got them to come back and update us, we didn't have any problems with that. We never have in the past.
So far.
so far. Still, I mean, it's no problem
Yeah.
to get the updates on them. It's public
Yeah,
knowledge pretty
I
much.
think that's a fair thing to add, Bill.
Yeah,
Is that verbiage, I'll just read it again, that do not conflict with the terms and conditions of the grant?
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of this bill is transparency and accountability if needed.
Well, accountability
That's an
is
overused term.
within the grants itself. I mean, they got accountability in every grant that you have to do
Right.
certain
I think there
conditions.
has been some issues
Well,
with grants.
doesn't it state, I mean, you know, because if you look at number C,
John, you,
Use your mic.
if you look at number, you all right? If you look at section C, it specifically says, and to the extent not inconsistent with or prohibited by the terms and conditions of the grant. So that clause is already in here.
Yeah, actually,
It says
I
the
think- I
council
think
may
C-
impose restrictions
I
upon
think
the
C should be struck, actually.
Well, it's saying exactly what you're recommending. It says that the council may impose restrictions upon the expenditure of the grant to the extent not inconsistent with or prohibited by the terms and conditions of the grant. So it's right there. It says the council cannot go that far.
Well, and we can just, if you want, just,
Sort of.
we could just essentially
Hey, it's
cut and
just
paste
an-
that same wording up into the portion that you were reading from earlier.
Well, actually,
So
I like the
it's-
wording you had earlier, because I think they're a little bit different.
just
Uh,
another sentence.
Yeah, I would leave it like we recommended earlier. I mean, like the question, do we want to leave C or not, or if we're going to keep C, I think that's fine, but I still would keep that same language you just added a minute ago.
Well, then I will use that, what I just read, I'll put that down in C as well.
Okay.
Is that okay with you, Bill?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. I did
Any more
like-
discussion?
Yeah, I still got some.
Yeah, let me, just the two items that I have.
Yes, sir.
are just general suggestions. In several places, we've referred to designating the department that would administer the grant. And in some cases, I think that would be agency. We have agencies that aren't departments that get grants and administer them. So I think that where it says department, we ought to add just in and/or agency.
And/or
Well,
agency?
no, just or agency.
Or agency.
Where are you reading that from?
Yeah,
Well,
where
one
is that?
example would be in, right at the start of 2918, that second anticipated grant, identified by the general nature and source of the grant and the department that will administer the grant. And we would just add in the department or agency that will administer the grant. And I think there's one or two other instances where that same language, department, is used, and that would be also changed. That's one. The other is, and I agree, 2919 is rather detailed, so I would suggest, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, putting in a new subpart to that, it would be E, and it would read, council may waive any provisions in this section.
Yeah, well,
Those are just suggestions.
yeah, I like that suggestion, because that saves me striking B, C, and D that I've currently struck, but if you add that, then it makes those,
So you're okay with E?
it makes them strikeable. Correct?
Is everybody okay with E? Okay. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, that's all I had, were those two suggestions.
Okay. Any more discussion on this?
Yes. The
Go
other
ahead.
question I have is, so why did we change in definitions authorized to anticipated? It was authorized grant, and we struck authorized it and added anticipated in our definitions in the actual bill itself.
Well, I mean, I think the basic reason is because they're not authorized until the council authorizes them. And there's basically two types of grants. We have the anticipated grants that are essentially listed in the budget, and then we have the unanticipated grants that are not. And for example, we just had a few, or at least one tonight, that would fall into that unanticipated category, and we're going to have another one here in a little bit involving the airport grant.
So,
Those are not in, they're not in this year's budget, so they're basically coming in after the budget is struck as essentially what we consider to be unanticipated. So that's the difference between anticipated and unanticipated and why it was changed.
Well, with that said, under the definition of unanticipated grant revenue, we struck the existing definition and added this new definition, but that new definition reads in the very first sentence, says, from a grant other than an anticipated grant that the council has approved by amendment. Well, if it's unanticipated, we wouldn't have had already approved.
Well, the only reason it says unanticipated is distinguish it from anticipated.
Right, I get that part,
Yeah, and
but it's the
that's
next
why.
part that says that the council has approved by amendment of the county's budgets to identify, but it says, that the council, quote, has approved.
Yeah, well,
Well, we
once,
wouldn't have approved, if it's unanticipated, we wouldn't have already have approved it.
yeah, I think we're maybe getting deep into semantics here, but
Yeah.
obviously,
you wrote it.
once you've approved it by amendment of the budget, well, then, yes, it has become approved as an unanticipated grant, because anticipated grants are defined to be those that are approved in the annual budget document. So that's the difference, is to distinguish between those two.
Yeah. I'm just trying to decipher how what's written is better than what was already written when it defined unanticipated grant. I guess, I'm just trying to rationalize I kind of like the existing verbiage more so than the replacement verbiage.
How's everyone feel?
I'm okay with it.
I'm okay either way.
I'd like to make a point, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
The original two discussions, I believe in order for this to move forward, there should be a formal motion on the first recommendation referencing the limited restrictions on the council's part. There are several sections where that would have to be implemented. I'm not, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you that, but
You're
formal.
saying we need to vote on each change?
Formal motion needs to be made, I think, on that change, and then the second change that Mr. Taylor suggested about, adding agency, so we don't get lost here in this process. It's not a work session, it's a legislative
No,
bill.
it isn't a work
So I
session.
think we need two resolutions for that.
I-
Two amendments.
Two amendments.
Mr. President, I don't think the actual vote for the introduction has been made just yet. So if you wanted to postpone the introduction of the bill to make these changes, we could do that. But that's entirely up to council.
I think that would be the wise thing to do.
Well, I think,
It seems like we've turned this into a work session.
Yeah, that's fine.
right, but it's been somewhat productive. I mean, if we've this far, I'd say we continue with this discussion. First of all, I guess you should possibly do the introduction. Let us continue with the discussion, and we could postpone it if we feel it's getting out of hand.
We
But I'm
made
not
the
so sure we have much
introduction,
further to
But we
go.
haven't voted on it.
Can
Well,
I
we haven't
just-
even, I think initially what Mrs. Hurley is saying, you have to have it introduced at the table. I don't think we've done that yet.
We haven't done what?
Motion to introduce and second and then discussion. Is that correct, Mrs. Hurley?
Well, the motion and the second has been made, but the formal vote has
But we
not
haven't
been
voted
taken.
on the introducing it yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's almost turned into a.
All right, I misunderstood what you were saying. Well, then again,
But are we talking about postponing it?
how much more do we have to go? We've got we have two amendments that have been suggested right now. Are there any more that are being proposed?
Bill, do you have any more?
Well, a couple things to discuss, but
Sure.
before we get too far, I agree, I'll make a motion to make, which was the first amendment, which was to, Mr. Taylor, you might have to read it back. Wait, go ahead, Ms. Hurley, 'cause I think you want to
So
get
what
us
I'm
in the right
saying
order.
is that you don't have to make a motion to amend because it's not been formally introduced yet.
Okay.
So what I'm suggesting is perhaps maybe making a motion to postpone the introduction of the bill to the next.
And then we can make the amendment so that it'll be added to the bill, so that when we actually,
Vote on it.
is that
Are
what
we
you're trying to get
postponing
to?
this for another date?
I'll make a motion to postpone.
I second that.
Got a motion and a second to postpone. All in favor?
Well, discussion on that, I would strongly suggest Mr. McCain get with Mr. Taylor to at least try to recognize what differences they might have, so that when it comes back to the table, there'll be less discussion.
I agree.
And can
Are
I
you
also
okay with that?
suggest, since we've gone this far, we might as well go the rest of the way if there's anything else to be discussed, rather than discussing that when we come back.
I agree.
Well, we already have a motion and a second to postpone it. Any discussion on postponing? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. So it's postponed.
And anybody that's got any suggestions or concerns can contact Mr. Taylor.
Please do. I know Bill does, so anybody else? And then we'll just bring it up at another meeting.
Well, it would be the next meeting, I believe, correct, Ms. Hurley?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Levin? Mr. Hitchens?
Good evening. Call your attention to Resolution 51, 2020, adopting the annual audit plan for fiscal year '21.
Okay, need a motion to approve resolution number 51-2020.
So moved.
So moved.
Got a motion, you need a second.
Second.
Any discussion? Levin?
Sure. This year I put 10 audits and projects on the audit plan. Purchase cards, fuel, payroll, legislative bills, grant expenditures, vendors, employee classification system, comprehensive budget review, and 2 that are continuing from the previous year's Civic Center events, which is underway now, and the audit manual updates. The purchase card, fuel, and payroll audits were done very recently. These are more comprehensive, they're more at the department levels, because what we found in the previous audits is that the controls are actually very decentralized. The departments that oversee these programs basically just get information from the departments themselves. And so the goal will be to go to the departments that have larger expenditures in these 3 areas to see what they are doing as controls. I'll take any questions about any of the audits that that I put on here.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Hitchens?
I do.
Ms. Ackley?
So how do you come up with the audit plan? What goes into putting this together?
So I send out surveys to department leaders. Some send back, some don't. We select audits from past years, like the vendor audit, for instance, hasn't been done since 2012. It's a very important audit that probably should be done more often. Also, but with talks with our external auditors, and just based upon our own observations from previous audits and being involved in the county.
Can you explain what the survey entails?
Yeah, the survey is a risk assessment that asks department heads for the likelihood of certain events and their impact. I can't remember what they all are off the top of my head. It's an 8-page survey. And it also asks if they have any suggestions. You know, some departments do ask us to come in and do consultations. That didn't happen this year, but it has happened in the past. Like for instance, with the community corrections, that was a consultation request.
So what happens to the department leaders that don't respond?
Nothing.
Nothing.
What should happen?
Well, there's a purpose for having an audit, isn't it?
I'm glad to see you have
Any more questions?
I'm glad to see you have the grant expenditures in there. I think that's very important for us to keep an eye on.
Is this sent to all of the enterprise funds that we also have in the county?
It was not sent to the nursing home. But yes, otherwise I believe it was.
Okay.
Mr. Hastings?
I was looking up the legislative bills audit. What is your plan for that, or what's your goals and intent there?
So that audit was from where a council member had asked for updates on certain legislative bills, and the executive administration suggested that perhaps that was a better project for internal audit. There's a few bills from 2016 that would pass this, but I haven't looked through it extensively, but I'm going to look at all the bills from 2014 up till date to see which ones are quantifiable that can actually be measured, to see if the county has complied with the new legislative bills, as well as what impact they've had on the county.
And the other one I had was of course, I see that you have also is the revenue cap.
So the revenue cap has been one that we've done for a few years now. We did it this year as well. It's just calculating the anticipated tax revenue in the budget and determining whether we stayed within the revenue cap or not. Just kind of making sure that we didn't overestimate, or it's basically a check and balance on the budget process.
The only real question I had, Levin, was, you're talking about updating the audit manual itself.
Yep.
That was a huge undertaking by the first auditor who came in, and she literally produced the whole document herself. I'm not quite sure, what her resources were, but I thought it was a very concise effort on her part. What do you anticipate? Because you have days not applicable. You mean you're just going to do it when you can get to it?
It's actually pretty well done. Steve and I worked on it, because it was from this previous year. We were waiting for legal review on it.
Okay.
But it's pretty well done already.
Good. Great. Okay. All right. I didn't know if you had anticipated some real problems with it or not.
Only if it comes back from legal. Then we'll see.
Okay.
Any more questions for Mr. Hitchens? All right. Mr. Hitchens, thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Levin.
Thank you.
Thought I heard somebody say something.
I guess you need to vote.
We have to vote on it.
Yeah, clean up, please. Okay, at this time, we can take public comments. Please limit all public comments to 3 minutes or less.
You need to
We have to vote on it, Larry.
Sorry?
We have to vote on the adopting the budget. Adopting the
You're
annual
right,
audit
we
plan.
did. Right, all in favor of resolution number 51-2020, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Thank you, Levin.
Chair votes aye, one nay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now, at this time, we have public comments. Please limit all public comments to 3 minutes or less. Any presented materials may be submitted to the council members. Please include 10 copies. Do we have any public comments? Any public comments? All right, now council comments. Any council comments? All right.
Mr. President,
Somebody, Mr. Hastings?
I'll just say briefly, I just wanted to officially welcome Mr. Pisoto. It was great to see him today. I know you mentioned drinking from a fire hose. I know he's got a lot to do, a lot to learn, and a lot to get up on speed, get us up to speed. But I really look forward to working with him. And also, the second thing I'll say is I usually try to bring up an update so everyone's aware. This once again, as we know, we're continuing to wear our masks and try to social distance as much as we can, even though it may not look like that on camera if anyone's watching. But obviously, the COVID-19 situation is still a very serious situation, which we've had 41 Wicomico residents that are now dead because of that, and then more than 1,100 people in our county confirmed as affected by this. So want to make sure that we're still continuing to show as a council, as a legislative body, that we still take this very seriously. And that's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Yes, and I agree with that comment about the mask. When I'm out in public, I see everybody complying, so it's good to see the public wearing their masks, and that helps flatten the curve. All right, to adjourn.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Another quick comment, if you don't
Yes.
mind. I do just want to mention to the public that as a result of some of the funding from the CARES Act, that we have additional funding that's been made available, and it's through our Salisbury Wicomico Economic Development Office through SWED. There's grants that are available, they're up to $10,000, and they're targeted at small businesses. And I believe I think it has to be businesses that are under 25 employees. Now, a lot of these businesses sort of missed that first wave of funding, and they have substantial funding that's available. They're taking applications. I think they started early last week. I think they've actually gotten 300 to date. So, so just want to make that aware to our small businesses out there that there's funding available here. This money is specifically for Wicomico County businesses, so they can contact the SWED office, and
They can go online and fill it out.
Yeah, right. You go online. There's an application. You got to show that you've been affected this, from this point of this year compared to last year. But it's not near as onerous as going through like the PPP process.
It's
So
simple.
yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, I saw that email today, and they were asking for businesses to contact them
Yes.
at Salisbury Wicomico Economic Development. So thank you, Mr. McCain. Anyone else? All right. To adjourn from legislative session to go into open work sessions, followed by a closed work session pursuant to general provisions of Article Section 3-305B1 to discuss the appointment of an individual over whom this public body has jurisdiction to protect the confidentiality of the individual. Need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Any nays? Okay. Ms. Hurley, do you have anything?
I do not. The first work session would be to discuss the purchase of 810 Second Street in Delmarva, Maryland, and we have Mr. Steve Miller here, Director of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism.
Steve, come on up, please.
Good evening.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Steve Miller, I'm the Director of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism for Wicomico County. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk about the potential purchase of the property in Delmar. We had a work session a couple weeks ago, and just a couple of quick updates as to where things stand based on the council concerns that were brought forth. One piece of information that I neglected to share the last time, Mr. Marshall owns the property. That would be the potential seller. Has done a significant amount of clearing at the property. There was a lot of overgrowth and trees and whatnot. And I've got photos, before and after photos, if that would interest anybody. But some work has been put into the property as far as clearing, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We did, based on the last council meeting and the concerns that were brought forth, reapproached him about the price. His position's unchanged as far as his asking price for the property. That remains at $38,000. He has informed us that he has another buyer if the county is not interested in the property. And so, this obviously is the will of the council. I think for my part, where I sit, my feeling on this is that I feel like it's a great opportunity, both for the county and for the town of Delmar and the residents. On the north side of the county, we're looking at, if we accept the asking price, we're looking at a $4,000 investment for a little over an acre of land that would complete an existing property that we have and really allow us quite a few options to improve that property. So I'd be happy to revisit or answer any questions that you might have, but our situation is similar to what it was.
Do you have any questions?
Mr. Miller, I had a question. How did this whole proposal begin, the whole process began, where we became aware of the fact that the property was available and the negotiations began? How did it all start?
We originally saw it either listed or someone drove by the property because we own the other and saw the sign out there. So a year ago, when we had purchased the other two lots, we had tried to reach out to that property owner and were not successful. So we wanted to acquire all three at that time, but at the time it was not listed. So we came upon it. I can't recall specifically how. As far as the negotiation part goes, that went through the county executive's office and Mr. Wilbur's office that directly negotiated. We were kind of kept in the loop on it.
But I mean, somebody would have had to have made a phone call to somebody else saying this property is available, wouldn't they?
Yeah, yeah, and again, I can't honestly recall when if we saw the sign or someone called, I don't recall how we were first made aware of it.
What real estate agency had it listed? I didn't think it was listed.
Yeah,
Was it listed by a real estate agent?
it was through Marshall, I guess,
Oh, okay.
yeah, Marshall Home and Land. Yeah,
It was listed through the owner.
right.
And yeah, Stephen, I appreciate your comments about the importance to the Delmar Little League. I mean, I'd like to see us do this. I mean, I know there's some concerns about the fact that it's a little bit more than the appraised value, but, that's not unusual that sometimes that happens. We just, I mean, whether it's the county, the state, the city, or government entities in general sometimes, I mean, sometimes they got to pay a little bit more because, the property, you don't want to be talking about eminent domain and trying to take properties via that. And if you ever do go that route, that's very expensive. I mean, you could spend more money than what the whole lot's even for sale for. But I think your comment, as you said earlier, about the fact that, for the county, it's going to cost the county $4,000, and we get almost an acre of land, and it's the last in that whole big block of the sports complex. This is the last piece of land.
Right.
And, it would be a shame for us not to acquire that, especially for the fact that, I think what the residents of Delmar and the youth of Delmar is going to get out of this. And actually, a little history to this, my father, 40 years ago, was the mayor of Delmar and was the one that was instrumental in getting the Mason-Dixon Sports Complex started. And, it's, here we are today, 40 years later, and it's grown, and it's, still a vital part of the community. And, just personally, I definitely like to see this move forward. I mean, it's good for Delmar.
Stephen, I think we were talking about it last week, and one of the council members asked me, is there a need for that property, or is it just something that would be nice to get right now?
I think it's both. I think one, it's a great opportunity that may never come again to complete that property. So I think it's a convenience in that respect, but I do think it's a need in the respect, part of the rationale of purchasing those other two lots was there's a real parking issue, and which in turn is a safety issue in Delmar. People park along that railroad track. There's accidents all the time there, people backing in and out. So to get people off of that and onto these new lots was part of the motivation. And I think what this third lot will allow us to do, I do think if we were to acquire it, we should have a public process with the residents in Delmar and seek input from the Little Leagues and the town and whomever else. But I think one of the opportunities that we could consider is, I mentioned, there's a very rundown concession restroom facility there that you could now potentially relocate to this piece of property, get all your parking, playground, main building there away from the railroad tracks, and I think would really complete that park. And they're starting to host more tournaments. They're hosting again this weekend. They're hosting part of our World Series. Locally, the Little League is pretty strong. So I think it's both. I think it's a convenience. We would survive without it, certainly, but I think it's an opportunity that I think I'd hate to see us lose. So.
You said there was a lot of accidents there. Did you get the statistics on how many accidents are there? Or
No, I don't have.
Was it that property that's causing the accidents, or?
No, I think what's causing the accidents, I don't have the statistics, but what causes the accidents is you have people parking perpendicular to the field towards those railroad tracks, and then they're backing out into traffic. And I'm speaking from experience, just having lived and coached in Delmar. There was a day I was at the coach pitch field, and we're playing with 7- and 8-year-olds, and you hear a big crash, and you turn and look, and someone's backing out and slamming. It happens on a regular basis, and I think just the foot traffic that goes across that road is something that I'd like to see reduced or go away. Is we don't need people sprinting across that road when people are flying down. It's a long straight road, as you know, and sometimes people go faster than they should, and I think it's a safety issue.
Yeah, and that's been the biggest concern of the complex since it was started years ago, because they always knew parking was going to be a challenge, and people would just it's just second nature. Everybody parks along the railroad. Problem with that is everybody's got to cross that road. And then they have to back out of that road, and you have kids that are, every car that comes there is bringing kids, and the kids are running across the road, and they're going back across the road. I mean, it's just, it's far from ideal. So anything that can help improve that
Yeah, it can
possible or draw people away from that.
right,
Plus, those people parking up against that railroad track are trespassing.
right. It's private.
This gets the
Yeah.
law parked that close to that railroad track.
Well, that would have been my next question. How would purchasing this property prevent people from parking along those tracks there?
I don't know that it would prevent or eliminate it, but what it would do is provide much better options that are more centrally located to your amenities, which would be potentially restrooms,
So you
playground.
wouldn't turn it into a parking lot?
I think you could. That's one of the things you could do, but I think those other two lots that we purchased, I would envision those as the parking, and then this being adjacent to it. I think you have a lot of options, and I don't know that we're prepared to decide that. Tonight, I would like to see public engagement on that, and like I said, but people, when absent of available parking or good parking, people find new and clever ways to park, and they will do it illegally or legally, and that creates other issues that,
And then they had the police station right next door, basically,
yeah,
and still did it.
Well, they move.
Yeah,
Police
just a
station.
block
So-
away.
yeah.
So we got 3 appraisals. We got one for 33 from Trice, we got one for 35 from McCain, and we got, so that makes we got
It
2
was just the
appraisals,
two.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
So that averages 34. I mean, I don't know what the county's history is paying more for land than it's appraised for. I don't know what that history is. I'm willing to go with a higher appraisal instead of the average. And I think that's a fair price. Mr. Marshall says he's got other buyers, but last night he was texting people on the council that they needed to buy this. So, I mean, I don't know why he's pushing us to buy it if he's got other interest in it. That seems kind of odd, So anyway,
I agree with Mr. Holloway. I mean, I think 35,000 is a reasonable. I mean, I think we need to be fiscally conservative during this time with COVID, and 35,000 seems like a reasonable amount. The
But-
rest could be
but we've already
taken
been there.
tax credits.
You've
Yeah, I mean-
already approached him with that.
Yeah, after the last meeting, that's what we've asked him.
That's what we
And
decided last
and
meeting.
he heard the comments from the council meeting, so he told us no to that.
Okay.
I think, at this point, it would be in your court as to whether we want to push that issue and run the risk of losing it. I for one, would not, but again, we'll do
And
what we
I
have to
think
do.
Steve's right. The ball is in our court right now, and Mr. Holloway offered an option, and it sounds like Mr. Marshall's not going to accept that, so what are we going to do?
I think getting back to Mr. Miller's comment, I mean, I hate to see us miss the opportunity for $3,000. I mean, I agree with everybody. I'd like to see us get it for 35, but if the seller's not going to sell it to us for 35, then we have that decision that are we going to spend $3,000 more to be able to get an acre of land? I mean, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. In the late 80s, I was one of those kids that were running across the tracks to go play some soccer and baseball and others, softball. I don't think that's, we are a county that is really well known for our, for our parks and our recreation, and this is part of our, I think, this is part of who we are. And I think this is something that we can continue to build on. If we can provide more open space for our youth, if this is something that we can continue to build on, it makes a difference of $4,000. No one likes to spend extra money, but ultimately this is program open space dollars. We may not have these dollars if we don't continue to spend them now, because the state of Maryland's made it pretty clear they're going to, they're going to bond fund that money in the future. So the more that we can use these dollars now locally or, for any kind of state parks, I think the better. A small amount of money, I'd say it's for a good purpose. I think it's a positive thing. And I don't have any problem paying the asking price of $38,000. I think sounds like Mr. Marshall's he's already going to be losing money no matter what. I think given what's happened to the property since it's been originally purchased, and then I'm sure going to closing or other kind of things is going to cost even more money. So for a small amount of money, for something that sticks within our image of our county, I think it's a positive thing.
I think that
Mr. Cannon?
the reason that program open space establishes the very strict parameters they do is because they want to make sure that everybody's paying and receiving a fair amount for the value of a piece of property under any circumstances. With that in mind, the average came out to 34,000. 38, of course, is 4,000 more. And then, of course, Mr. Holloway suggests 35. I could live with that. But then to say, well, now it's only 3,000 more than that, well, that's not really true. Originally, it's 34. The owner's asking for 4,000 more, which is more than a 10% increase on the value of the property. So program open space sets these parameters for a reason. And they say the average is 34,000. Mr. Holloway says 35. I'm okay with that.
Mr. Cannon, that's what we did the last meeting.
I understand. This is a work session, Bill, for us to each explain what our perspectives are on this, and I've explained my perspective.
You're repeating what you're acting like we've just discovered that. That's what we discussed at the last meeting, and Mr. Holloway made that suggestion, and we decided and authorized Mr. Miller to offer 35.
Exactly, and I'm staying
And he
with
did
that.
that.
I'm staying with that. That's my comment. It's a work session. My comment is I want to stay with the 35.
Yeah, I have to make this comment. We should be here as a council to make things happen, to make our community better. The question should be, how can we make this work? Not how can we make this not work? And I'm hearing, I'm up to other solutions or something to make it work. Or where can we get this $4,000 from? Well, let's see, the county has, we have $42 million in rainy day funds. I mean, I'll get my phone out here and do that math, because I'm not sure if enough zeros are going to fit on my.
Bill, I treat
my
$4,000. I treat
But
$4,000
I'm gonna
of
take
county
the
taxpayers' money.
$4,000, let's divide that by $42 million. Yeah, well, that's 5 zeros after the decimal point. I mean that's. I need a mathematician out here to help me with that, because that's somewhere in the 100,000ths of a percent range. I mean, that's just but we should be here. How can we get this done? Not how can we not do this?
I think we've done that. The program open space says they'll accept the average, which is 34. I think it's a generous offer for the council to say, well, we'll pay 35. We'll take this money out of the taxpayer's pocket. I don't agree with you, Bill, because anybody can compare the fact of, well, $3,000 is only 1/10 of 1,000th of 1% of our budget, but I don't care. $3,000 is still a lot of money to me. I would hope it was still a lot of money to every member of the council and our taxpayers in Wicomico County, and we are trying to get it done. Joe's suggesting we go $1,000 above what was recommended.
Well,
And I can agree with
I
that.
wish Bill McCain Sr. was here, because he was an example of somebody that looked at how to get something done, not how to not do something. This is
Can I
about
make a
not
suggestion?
doing
I
something.
don't agree with that.
Can I
Well, then what's your resolution to get it done?
Can I make a suggestion?
We've given it.
Mr. Miller, whenever you did the, I'm drawing a blank, with the field 7.5, is there something along those lines we can do as a fundraiser to make up that difference of 3,000?
I suppose that's an option. I mean, I think there was a different draw for that other project. So if you're suggesting a fundraiser type thing, I mean, I suppose that there's no guarantee in that, but I suppose that could be explored.
I mean, when a community has something vested, when they have donated money to it, something vested in it, they tend to embrace it more, take more pride in it. So I like the fundraising idea that you did for Field 7.5, and I don't know how much you raised from that, but I thought it was well done.
I appreciate it.
Joe, did you have a comment?
Well, Bill mentioned a rainy day fund. One of the reasons we do have a rainy day fund is because we've not been frivolous with the money, in the past. If the property was worth more, it would have appraised more, and it didn't. I mean, you're an appraiser, Bill. I mean, I guess I was wonder if it's, you know, I think when appraisers look at a piece of property, they look at what the best use and value of that property is, and that's what they appraise it for. I don't understand why it didn't appraise for more. So, anyway.
Ernie, what are your
I
thoughts?
just, anyway.
That parking, if they use it as a parking lot, we can also look at it, it's gonna help Delmar School out. I don't know if any of you ever been up there when they have dismissal or whatever. That is a crowded place, and they use part of that on the corner as parking now. And it also, because Delmar itself, the elementary school, they have no room to expand to make a parking lot. So that would help them out as far as parking. They build that as a parking lot right there on that side where it's at. So to help the school system out also.
But then you're gonna have people running back and forth across the street again.
Well, they
and that's
got
what we're trying to get away from now.
That's a different street.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's on the other street. It's not on the street by the railroad track.
No.
The property itself,
Yeah, it's South Second
yeah.
as opposed to,
So we have the option on the table. What are we gonna do, 35 or 38?
Is the fundraiser, is that, no, are we not even discussing that? No one's interested in that one?
That was a question you were asking Mr. Miller.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can, as far
I'd be
as
willing to help
how
you
the
with that.
county, if the county were to accept the asking price of 38, that's the real question, is do we accept his asking price? As far as how we come up with that for, whether that's, you know, our plan was to come out of the Recreation Parks budget, but if we were to find some other mechanism to do that, we could certainly explore that. But I guess the question would be, wherever that funding comes from, is the county willing to pay the asking price? If we're not, you know, whether, you know, I don't know if he has another buyer or not, but he says he does, we do run the risk
Well,
of.
you're fundraising all the time when you know, everything the Rec and Parks does is fundraising because you charge fees for what you do, right? So you've already fundraised, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
a huge chunk of our budget is program fees.
Right.
So in that sense, yeah, we're doing that
Yeah.
already. But in that particular property, we lease that to the town of Delmar, so we don't realize rental revenue from that because it's part of that lease, and there's no annual fee with that. So
Well, Mr. Dow, why don't we just see how many members are interested? I mean, I think we should pay to 38,000. That's my opinion.
I've been writing down. Bill, you're okay with 38?
Yes.
Josh, you're okay with 38? Ernie, you're okay with 38?
Yep.
Joe, 35. John, 35. Nicole,
35.
35. And I really want to get the property, but I think we shouldn't go no more than 35.
Mr. Miller,
yes, sir.
I can get you your $4,000. I mean, I'll pay the $4,000 if I've got to pay that $4,000.
That's very generous of you.
Yeah, we could take up a collection here and make it pretty quickly, but above all,
I was gonna say, I was a fundraiser and I would.
let's
say
secure
do it.
that property. I just want to secure that property, that's it.
Yeah, because this is getting embarrassing, yeah, so, yeah.
Bill, I don't appreciate that.
I don't care,
Calling
Joe,
this
it is.
embarrassing. You know, this council
We're here
sits
to do
and works
good
on
for
this
our
stuff.
community,
I know
Joe.
that, Bill.
And this is an opportunity to make good in our Delmar
But
community.
to call the council embarrassing because we're sitting here debating this, you know, that.
Well, I think it is embarrassing that we are not trying to do good for the
I think it's
youth of the
embarrassing to
Delmar
look at the
community.
appraisals and see your company appraised it.
Well, it's the same as the other
You know,
one. That's not the
why are you
point,
doing
that's not the
that
point.
while sitting on the council?
That's not, I don't own that company, Joe, I haven't owned it for
Yeah,
a
I mean,
year.
you work there,
So,
correct? You said you
right.
did. You know, so, you know, sit here and call it embarrassing what the council is doing, that's, never mind.
We are going through some tough times, and every penny counts, so. Steve, do what you can at 35.
Okay.
Mr. Dodd, can I just make one observation?
Mr. Taylor, yes, sir?
Under the code, it provides that no property or interest therein shall be acquired by condemnation or otherwise unless adequate funds for the same shall have been included in the capital or expense budget. So whatever price you may negotiate, there's probably going to have to be some budget action. I don't think there's any appropriation for that right now. And that would not make any difference on whether it comes from open space funds or Mr. McCain's pocket or my pocket. It still has to be appropriated.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, very good. Thanks.
Mr. Taylor, you're on board?
Yeah, this is the, I guess you could call it the budget wrap-up.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
There are several parts of this. I'm going to address two of them, and I think Ms. Hurley, who's more familiar with some of the other parts, will address those. The two parts that I'm going to address are the capital budget items that the council voted to restore for Board of Education capital appropriations. There were three items, as you'll recall. There was the roof at the West Side Intermediate School, $281,000. This and the other two were all items that the board feels that they had requested that Mr. Culver did not include in his proposed budget, and that the council on June 2nd, just before it adopted the county's budget, voted, and at that time also adopted the CIP, county CIP, voted to put back in the CIP for this current year, FY21. Under the charter, that particular part of the CIP, FY21, becomes the county capital budget for FY21. In other words, once you put something in, once something is in the CIP for this current year, it's automatically in the capital budget. So it was in there when you adopted the budget, because immediately prior to adopting the budget, you changed and amended the CIP to restore these items. As I say, the first one is the roof replacement for West Side Intermediate. That's $281,000. The other, next one is somewhat convoluted because it involves the appropriation for the Beaver Run School. And I say that's convoluted for this reason or reasons, that there was $7 million that was to have been obtained in the prior fiscal year, that is the one that just closed, FY20, by issuing bonds, $7 million for that construction of the new Beaver Run School. The county did not go to the bond market, so therefore no bond proceeds were obtained. The understanding that we were given several months ago, I believe it was in February, by the executive branch, was that they were scraping around from proceeds of older bonds and thought that they could scrape up around $6.5 million. The understanding, at least at that time, as I understood it, was that that would be money that would then go to essentially cover that $7 million for last year. Now, what has happened, actually, I don't know. We've never been advised. I can only tell you what at least my understanding was from the presentation that was made back, as I say, I think it was in February. This year, the board requested another $7 million for Beaver Run, again, through bond financing. The CIP that the executive turned in has, again, this $6.4 million from what I'm going to call what's listed as old money, meaning from these existing bonds that were issued for other projects that are essentially surplusage left over after those projects were finished, plus going to the bond market for new money for about $80,000. The total comes to about $6.5 million. At the meeting on June 2nd, the council voted to restore that $7 million of new money from the issuance of new bonds. That change has not been reflected in the budget document either that the county executive has posted on the county's website. The third item pertains to the Mardella School. And this is an item that I have some difference with the Board of Education on. That was a request that they made in their CIP that they turned in late in 2000 or sometime in 2019 for $2.5 million. That particular item, $2.5 million, does not appear in the budget document that the board turned in subsequent to that in March of this year. In my opinion, that probably is not subject to being restored. However, on June 2nd, the county council decided otherwise and did restore it. Be that as it may, it is not in the budget document that the county executive has posted on the county website. So we have 3 items that the council voted to restore for the Board of Education. None of them are in the budget that has been posted as the, quote, adopted budget on the county website. So that covers those items. There's not much to say, I don't think, except what I've said. You can ask me questions, but I don't have answers. All I know is that right after the June 2nd meeting, there was a communication from Mr. Strasburg indicating his view, and I think that would probably be the county executive's view too, that the restoration of the money for Mardella was improper. That communication didn't mention the other 2 items, this roof for the school and the money for Beaver Run. So that's that item. The other item is the changes that the county council made to the budget for the executive and administration, essentially the executive's office. And in that case, as you'll remember, there were several changes that you made. One was to entirely strike the salary that was listed for the position that's described in that part of the budget as the chief financial officer. That was $128,520, as I recall. You voted to take that entirely out. You also reduced the salary for the Director of Administration. That was listed as, I think it was $142,866. You reduced that to $120,000, which, as I understand it, is the current salary for Mr. Pisotta. The idea was to leave that difference between those 2 numbers, the $142,886 and the $120, which is $22,866, to be available to compensate Mr. Strasburg for overlap services during this year to essentially backstop, help out, advise, call it what you will, Mr. Pisotta. So anyway, those changes are not reflected in the budget document that's posted on the website. They still are in there. The other change that you made to that executive office items in the budget was you reduced the $25,000 for contractual services that was in there originally, and essentially that is where the $22,866 from Mr. Strasburg would go, because my understanding from Ms. Carley is he's no longer a county employee, W-2 type employee, he's now a 1099 contractor employee like me. And so he would be under contractual services. So with all of those changes, there is a reduction in the amount for the county executive's office. That is correctly stated in the budget that's posted on the website. However, the way they get there is completely different. What they have done is they have taken the cuts that I mentioned, which total $163,000 and change, and instead of striking those items that I've just gone through or reducing them, as I've discussed, they've put in a negative item under the operating expenses of $163,000, like if you had, if you will, a negative appropriation. As far as I know, there ain't such beast. It just doesn't exist. You appropriate money. You don't appropriate negative amounts of money. And that's how they essentially get to the same overall level of expenditure for the county executive's office, but it is different, completely different from what the council approved at the meeting on June 2nd. And the difference, of course, would be going forward, those numbers would then be repeated in the future. And they do not show up as the county adjusted them on June 2nd. So that's the second group of items. As far as these amounts are concerned, My view is the council just simply needs to put the version of the budget that was adopted online to essentially make the changes in the printed pages that it voted on, and that's the adopted budget. Because it's the council's budget. The council adopts the budget. The executive proposes it, submits it, but the council is the one that adopts it. So, long story short, on those two items, that's what I do. The other items, I think Ms. Hurley can discuss, and I don't know whether you can indicate whether you think there should be any changes made on those too, Laura. You're a little bit more familiar with those than I am.
So the other changes that you see in your brief book were pretty much done as council had adopted. They are shown properly. With the exception of the state's attorney's office, there were a couple of salary shifts and funding. You'll see for the assistant state's attorney, position number 10040, the version posted online shows the salary is $61,950. The version that was adopted by council shows that salary is $60,900. And there's a couple of other positions in that department where they shifted some salaries around, but they don't go above or under what council approved. So you'll also see a salary savings, which readjusted all those numbers. The one for the county council was done properly. The changes to the Board of Ed Appendix A, that was also done properly. Contingency transfers were done correctly. The lease vehicles were done the way council had recommended, and the solid waste changes were also done as council had adopted. So that's the only other changes that are in the brief book. So the two main ones are the Board of Ed and the Executive Administration Fund 5.
So,
Joe?
Mr. Taylor, you're suggesting we post our own budget on the website. Mr. Culver's office doesn't follow our budget, he follows his budget. So what's the ramifications of that spending the money that's not been appropriated?
I guess I should have said, it always makes sense to maybe approach them and see if they will make the changes. But my guess is that it's pretty much of a fait accompli, or it wouldn't have been posted that way to begin with. You never know. I mean, we've had no communications that I'm aware of about any of the changes, with the single exception of the restoration of the funds for Mardella School, which in a communication from Mr. Strasburg, he indicated that they thought that was improper. But it seems to me that probably it will come to the county council having to post its own, the budget that it adopted. I'd like to be wrong about that, but, you know, I wouldn't bet money on it.
Ms. Hartley, what you laid on our desk in front of us was the original budget, not the original budget, but the budget that's online, and you made the corrections?
No, so the version that's in the brief book is what is shown online. The version that's on the council table is the version with the handwritten changes that we think is how the budget should be approved or
What was the
posted.
approved budget?
What is shown on the table.
Right. Okay. So, Mr. Taylor, how do we go about putting it online?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing to do is make the changes, and then secondly, just as I understand it,
Looks like we got the
correct me if I'm
changes here.
wrong, because I don't do this, but the council has the ability to put items on the website, as far as I know, so.
This is an exhibit to the legislative bill, so it would be posted on the website as the adopted legislative bill.
Okay.
Well, I didn't vote for the budget. 4 people did, and 4 council members did. And whether you agree with it or not, the executive's office should have the respect of those 4 council members that did vote for it. So, What do you do when they spend the money that they're not supposed to be spending?
Well,
We've been fighting
I
that
better
battle
not
for a while.
answer that question because I might wind up in jail if I
Yeah.
followed through on it, but
Whatever.
You know the answer to that, Joe. We've been fighting that for a while.
Any more discussion on
Well,
this? John?
has there been any communication with anybody who may be representing the executive branch since a week ago that this memorandum was issued? I know that there's been discussion about Mardella, but what about all these other inconsistencies that have just been published regardless of the council's
there's
vote?
been no communication by me. I don't know whether Mrs. Hurley may have had some.
No, we wanted to bring it to the council's attention before we sent a letter to the executive.
Right, well, I think that's very important, that we do get a letter to them. The only reason for the letter is that you have to establish something in writing as to what their concerns are, and then you know where you're beginning, and then you have some type of a basis as to whether you get a response or not, as to where we're headed from there. I don't know how we're going to resolve the Mardella issue. I'm not really, at this time, without further discussion, but I think immediately we should get a letter to them, to the executive branch, stating where all the inconsistencies are and where they need to make those corrections.
Mr. McCain, do you want to send a letter?
You know my letter position.
I do.
But anyhow,
I-
it is what it is.
I think it's
You know,
appropriate to
so, right.
submit a letter like Mr. Cannon asked. How's everybody else feel?
Yeah.
I would like to get an explanation. I mean,
I can't hear you.
I would like to get an explanation
Good luck.
You just did.
from the executive side.
Good luck.
Well, that's what the letter would,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yes, I would
Request.
like to have the letter.
okay. All right.
I just might.
Josh?
I would just add to that, now that we're starting a new relationship with a new,
Director of Administration?
yeah, I think it'd be nice to really restart, and be nice fresh relationship there, and I feel for the individual who's taking that position, and I realize that it's not going to be easy. So, but as much as we could continue to help and go out of our way to make sure that that we're clearly communicating what we want and in a non-threatening way.
I have faith in Mr. Pasoda.
I really do too. A lot of hope.
Did someone on this side have a comment? Did you, Mr.
I
Taylor?
did have one other thing, and I believe this is from Mrs. Hurley, that in addition to Mardella, I believe the position of the executive branch is that none of the items that were restored, that would be the school roof, as well as the Beaver Run bond financing, they feel all of those were improper. Isn't that the understanding that you were given?
From Mr. Strasburg,
Yeah.
he doesn't think that council had the authority to tell the executive what to fund in the capital budget.
So,
What is the history on that, Laura? Has it been done before?
I am not aware of that being done before.
yeah,
This would be
actually,
the
we
first
did-
time.
No, we did at one time restore some one-time cuts.
To
but
the
not
CIP?
capital.
We did, they weren't CIP items, but the state enabling legislation for restoration is essentially anything that's in the budget for the board, that the board submits, that the county executive doesn't include. It can be things other than the CIP.
And we were very careful about that during the process when we were adding this back in. We were very careful to make sure that what we were adding in had been part of what was originally presented to the executive to begin with. And even Mardella, we did ask the superintendent during the meeting, was this presented originally? And the superintendent confirmed that yes, it had been. So I think the council acted in the best interest, and we certainly acted, I think, legally. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's not precedent, it's not anything. It's what the legal direction was that we took. And I think we were very matter of fact in making sure we followed that.
Well, my views of it notwithstanding, you certainly voted to restore it, all three items.
All right.
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay.
it's been restored by council action. Now, whether, I do have some concerns about Mardella, but that's separate from what we're talking about now in the way that the county executive has presented the budget, because I don't have any concern about the school roof and Beaver Run. And they're important items, too.
Okay, any more discussion? So we're gonna submit a letter to the executive, okay? All right, moving on. Need a motion to go into closed work session.
So
So
moved.
moved.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We'll be going in closed work session.